There are some good things happening. The work on a vaccine, although that probably will take 18 months, that's going full speed ahead. Our foundation is funding that. We're looking at getting vaccines to everyone in the world. So in the long run, that is the key thing. We had a really positive result that people were wondering, did you have to have a medical person swab you in this way that they stuck it deep in your nose? We were able to prove, which on Monday the FDA made official, that if you do a self-test where you don't have to have the medical worker with personal protection equipment, that self-test is as accurate as the one where the medical worker gives it. So that means that by self-swabbing, we'll be able to get a lot more tests done and only be limited by the PCR back-end capacity. So there's good news coming. One of the therapeutics, although none of them are proven out, but there are quite a few. We have a thing the foundation created called the Therapeutics Accelerator to really look at thousands of compounds and make sure we focus the human trials on the ones that have the most promise. So, innovation, some of which we could have done in advance, but innovation really is happening. But, when you look at those numbers, the U.S., now with the most cases, there is no state that has gotten to the point where their numbers are flat and are going down. And the testing capacity means we're quite blind to a lot of these cases right now. So it can be done, but we're not, the light is not at the end of the tunnel in terms of a mid-April reopening. Yeah, our foundation works a lot on diagnostics and vaccines and understanding how to make new vaccines, make them in large quantity. That's what we're doing all the time. That's caused us to understand about this pandemic risk and talk about it going back a long time. When this particular virus hit, we saw that getting the testing capacity up very rapidly would be very, very key. And so there's a number of companies we work with on that. I've done conference calls with the drug companies, talked with the diagnostic companies to really get this response so that we can see what's going on. Testing is important, drugs to reduce the disease, so we created the Therapeutics Accelerator for that. And then we're working closely with the vaccine companies, and they're the ones, although it's probably 18 months or so, they're the ones that can really get things back to where we're not worried about large public gatherings.
You think it's 18 months at the soonest?
Well, if everything went perfectly, you could do somewhat better than that, but I wouldn't want to create an expectation for something quicker. We've got to make sure it's safe. We have to build up the manufacturing capacity. And our team, who's experts in vaccines, works with Dr. Fauci and his team, and I think we've got a very common message about the work that needs to be done there.
Where do you think money needs to go most critically first at this point in time?
Well, the critical supplies, the ventilators, the masks, the protective equipment, obviously that is the most urgent thing to help the healthcare personnel. The testing capacity, so that somebody knows within 24 hours, if they're at all symptomatic, we should get them a home test. 24 hours later, they should know for sure so that they can isolate themselves completely and not have that infection lead to many other infections. Over time, it's going to be building for all the vaccine constructs that there's 7 or more that look promising. We'll probably have to build factories in parallel with testing the safety and efficacy, knowing that only probably 2 of the vaccines will be the ones we go ahead with. So it's risky, but it's so important to get not just hundreds of millions, but literally billions of those vaccines, because this is a global problem. And although the US has got the most cases right now, as time goes on, the developing countries where isolation is more difficult and the health system is very weak, sadly, they're most likely to experience the most pain of all as this goes global.
You've been saying for a long time that we're not prioritizing testing. Who should be leading the way here?
Well, the federal government needs to set the priorities, because we have a lot of people who are just worried who would like to get a test. And if we had infinite capacity, that would be great. And so as many as half of our tests are going to the people they shouldn't. And that's causing you to have to wait often 3 or 4 days, even if you're a healthcare worker, to get that result back. Those results should be coming back within 24 hours because we're appropriately prioritizing the contact tracing and those who are truly symptomatic as the ones that use up that testing capacity.
Back in 2015, you warned that we were not ready for the next epidemic. Why aren't we better prepared?
Well, in fact, very little investment was made into, for example, being able to ramp up diagnostic capacity very quickly. And so we could have done work from 2015 or even earlier to do that. Likewise, the ability to make the antiviral drugs, to make the antibodies, to make the vaccines. Our foundation and some other governments did work on some new vaccine platforms, which are the most promising that are being accelerated here during this epidemic. But sadly, because you can't estimate the risk, and it was something I was trying to talk about and thought we had some engagement on, but then actually the personnel in this area were cut back. So I think this time people understand that this is a trillions of dollars event. It's going to be hundreds of thousands of lives on a global basis. I think now people understand why those alarms were raised, and that for the next one we will be far more ready than we were for this one.
So even in, because folks look, people who want sort of county by county or say, let's get back online faster, say, well, look, in some states there's less than 200 cases. In many states there's less than 200 cases right now. You're saying even in those states, the same kind of shutdown needs to occur?
Well, let's say you have 100 cases, and let's say you don't do a shutdown, then it grows 33% per day. So you take 100, you get 1,000, you get 10,000. It's exponential growth. If you're not stopping it, the sooner you engage in the shutdown, the easier it is to get to that peak. We have not peaked. The parts of the country that aren't shut down, in late April, we should start to see the numbers peak there. They'll still be too high to open up. So you'll probably have to go another month to really get those numbers down. But any part of the country that has cases, and truthfully, because of our problems with testing, because we're not prioritizing testing the right way, that a lot of those places actually do have cases. But even if they have the 100, that will grow, and people do cross county boundaries. And so basically the whole country needs to do what was done in the part of China where they had these infections.
Yeah, and it's worth pointing out again that states that had just a few cases last week have, over 1,000 or sometimes 2,000 cases this week, to your point, Bill. The other thing I'm curious about, we keep hearing that the virus is going to dictate the timeline. Dr. Fauci has said that. When you look at this virus, we got 3.5 months worth of data now, 150 countries. If you apply all the analytics that Microsoft, that all the analytics that we can possibly apply to this, is how this is going to sort of progress and end knowable? I mean, can you give a clear answer depending on what sort of mitigation measures we have in place?
It's very likely that rich countries who uniformly throughout their country do a serious shutdown, that they will be able to avoid a high percentage of their population getting infected. That's what the exemplars, like some of the work in China and South Korea, are telling us. Now, as you get to poorer countries, the difficulty of doing the isolation, where you live close by in slums, where you have to go out every day to get your food, it is going to be much, much tougher. And so, by summer, I think the rich countries that have been competently led on this will not have to go back into shutdown. And, from the disease point of view, they'll avoid very large numbers of deaths. And so in that phase, we still will have a challenge with the developing countries.
One of the things that Dr. Fauci actually said in our last hour, which really concerned me, and I was asking him about the states that, I think there's more than a dozen or so that have just 100 or 200 reported cases. He was saying how it's critical that, that those states, that they have testing there, that they test, and that they do contact tracing of all those who are known to be infected to really, right now, when the numbers are still low, track it all. And then I asked him, he was using a lot of future verbs about things needing to happen or plans. It didn't sound like, I asked him if it was actually happening now. He said it needs to happen a lot more. From what you're saying, it's got to be happening right now, because if there's not that contact tracing in places where it seems like it hasn't really hit, we're going to see it hit.
That's right. I mean, we wish that we'd shut down even sooner in places like New York. Then you would have not had the medical overload that is such a huge challenge for them. Unless you're going to partition the country, the whole country has to be in this together. And we're not, I don't see us making people not cross county lines or something like that. So it really is how many cases are in the country, and have we adopted in terms of testing prioritization, contact tracing, the right things. But the good news is we're seeing that countries that pay that price, which is a gigantic price, then the percentage of Chinese that are infected is like 0.01%. And so now, stores are open there and closed in the rest of the world. That's, I'm not sure you call it good news, but I totally agree with what Dr. Fauci said. He's been a very positive voice about the numbers driving this, and those numbers are very uncertain because of the still the disorganization of the testing capacity and where it's directed.